Good evening and namaste, everyone. So today we have a discussion on the politics of craft, and we have Laila Tyabji, founder of Dastakar. We have Uzramma, founder of Andhra Dastakar and Malka, and Aruna ji, who is the advisor of Tilonia Bazaar and also co-founder of MKSS. So I request you all to come and take the seats on stage.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I've been given the difficult task of introducing three doyens here with us. I think they don't need any introduction, but still, I will try a little. We have Uzramma, who is an absolute doyen as far as the textiles is concerned. It's weaving, it's different techniques, different cottons, and also the different colors, and getting back to the traditional ways which were. Then, of course, we have Laila. Laila ji is a doyen as far as the Dastakar is concerned. She started it, and she still continues to bring it to the forefront, making all of us aware how much India has to offer. I've read her blogs for the saris, which is a dying thing as far as the younger generation is concerned. But looking at her and reading about it, I think it has inculcated a lot of interest and brought the craft and the craftspeople to the forefront. And of course, Aruna doesn't need any introduction, and I wouldn't do a justice if I even tried. But yes, Aruna helps us to fight for the rights of the craftsmen, to give them dignity, and to make sure that they are not lost in this machine-made age of ours. And I'm sure this is going to be a very interesting discussion about politics and craft. So the floor is completely to you, Aruna, and we start. You have a mic?
Thank you, Sanjeevani. Sanjeevani is the Vice Chair of Hateli, the organization that has brought the bazaar to you, which is being displayed outside. It is the institutional structure that followed the first venture into handicrafts by Tilonia, called the Barefoot College, called SWRC. In 1975, when they had their first exhibition in a place called Triveni in Delhi. And at that time, it was very difficult and very, very trying times, because craft was then seen as not really as part of development. It was seen as a separate entity. I was then working with SWRC, and we had to fight to get it acknowledged as a part of the development paradigm. We had to persuade and argue with people who were helping SWRC financially that it was really development, and it related to a large chunk of India, of Dalits, of minority communities who depended on it for a livelihood. So the first interest that SWRC had in this, Barefoot College had in it, was a livelihood. And it started working with leather. Dalit communities worked with leather, with migrant women, because many women went to Delhi, Kanpur, Jammu as construction labor at that time. Their families were very in dire need of money and of stability. And at that point, I now pay tribute to Mangi. She no longer with us today, but Mangi, a Dalit woman who was a mason's wife, actually educated me about the condition of women who went on migration. She lost 6 babies because she was always somewhere else and she couldn't get medical help. She finally delivered her 7th child in the medical section of Tilonia. Tilonia does many more things than crafts, but it has had 3 faces which it has shown the outside world. One has been this music that you heard. One has been the crafts that you will now have seen and we will now talk about. And the third has been the various technologies it has developed which have made it famous. But today I have it's a great honor, but it's also a great happiness to have two extremely good friends on stage with me. Today I work in a completely different sphere. I work with rights for workers, and in that sphere somewhere there is also crafts. And I can never lose sight of what was my first love in one sense, and remains something that is always there in my vision as an area which needs to be sustained and developed. So these two extraordinary women have been on this journey and sustained it while I disappeared after a while to fight for workers' rights in a different sphere. So I'm extremely pleased and very happy to have both of them with me today. I just want to draw your attention to an earlier workshop we had about 2 hours ago, in which we had many sister organizations and very many important women and a man join us in conversation. There was Rajendra from Avani. Apart from him, we had Shobita from DEF. We had Shumita Ghosh. Where is she? From Rangasutra. They're all there somewhere, I hope. Then there was Sanjeevani, who introduced the speakers to you today. And we had, apart from her, we had others who joined the conversation from outside. There was Zulfi, there was Haima, there was Chandra Jain, there was Vidya, and there was also Sarita, there was Urvi, and there was Shweta. And all of us sat together for 2 hours to talk about what are the challenges for the crafts people and for crafts in India, and how we can take it forward. So I'm really very happy that this conversation will now be held with a much larger group. And I hand over to Laila to lead the conversation, to take us wherever she wants with Uzramma. Wherever you feel I can contribute by being the devil's advocate, you can just rap me on the knuckles. Thank you.
I thought you were going to ask us searching questions and we would answer them. Anyway, I'm very happy to be here, and what Aruna is doing now is so important actually for the craftspeople that Uzramma and I work with. So we wish her very well on this quite difficult journey that she's had, and that she's managed to keep both her intellect and her sense of humor alive is, I think, a testimonial to her. It's quite moving in a way for me to be sitting here today, because Tilonia was one of the first projects. Of course, my 6 months in Kutch was what set me off on my craft journey. But very soon after Dastakar was created, Tilonia actually asked me to come as a visiting designer to Tilonia. And it was quite a shock to see the piece that I made, one of the pieces I made then, hanging outside. And it came, I'm talking about it because I remember when I arrived in Tilonia and I was supposed to work with the patchwork and embroidery women, and I saw these piles of cloth, which were the leftover chindis from what they had been making already in applique. And every time they cut an elephant or flower or something, there were little bits left over. So I got them to sort them out color-wise, and I said, we'll use these now. And that was how that bedspread started off. So it was very good to see it again. Craftspeople, as we often say, and most people who are writing about crafts, somewhere include this sentence, which goes something like this, that craftspeople are the second largest employment sector in the country. And it is true. But having said this, and it's mouthed in government meetings, it's mouthed in articles about craft, NGOs working with craft use it also as a way to bolster their arguments. But having said it, it becomes almost like Gandhiji, something that you say and then you forget about. Because it's so commonplace, it's so thing, and in a way, a lot of people feel that it's quite irrelevant to the lives that most people in urban India lead. and that in a country which is aspiring to become an industrial power, an economic power, an IT giant and things, where do craftspeople uh, fit in? They're very useful for tourism. They're very useful when you want to put them on a decorative poster for Incredible India. But most of the time, we don't realize that they are an integral part, actually not just of our aesthetic in our culture, but of our economy as well. And I think all of us, even the most yuppie young corporate executive, doesn't realize how he does use craft. It may be in a cane mora that he has in his bachelor flat. It could be the lungi that he wraps around himself after he has a bath. It could be something quite small, a sort of packet of bangles that he gives his girlfriend. But craft is there everywhere, and we take it so much for granted that none of us really think that it won't be there. And yet, it will. There is a chance that craftspeople may not be around forever and ever. In the 50 years that I've worked in the craft sector, the number of craftspeople has shrunk by more than half. We lose 10 to 15% of our craftspeople every decade. And if there are people in this audience, or even among the NGO community, who say, well, you know, it's partly because the government doesn't do anything about craft. Well, first of all, I'd like to say to you that this has been a recurring theme of every Indian government except in the first 5-year plan. In that first 5-year plan, there was an allocation of 3% of the budget for the handicraft and handloom sector. Now that has gone down to 0 something or the other, which we don't even. Every year, I'm asked by either the Indian Express or the Business Standard to write an article commenting on the budget, and I have to then politely say, I'm sorry, I can't find the craft sector in the budget, so what can I write about? So I can send you a one-line sentence to that effect, but otherwise, what is there to say? The other thing that people salve their consciences about is that they say that, well, craftspeople today don't want to be craftspeople. None of the young people want to be craftspeople. They want to do something else. Well, in a way, that's true, but it's not because necessarily for economic reasons. Because actually, if you're a young craftsperson today and you're ambitious and skilled, there's quite a lot of potential, and some of them make a very good living. I think the main reason is actually our fault, the fault of all of us here. It is because we don't give craftspeople the social status that other skilled professionals do. Bangalore is an IT city. Many of the young people sitting here today are IT professionals. But I can tell you that to design and put on the loom an ikat, double ikat sari is much more complex than programming a software program. And yet we simply don't give these craftspeople the status of professionals. They're considered something rural, something pretty primitive, old-fashioned, and they'll always be there, but they're not really particularly worthy of things. The other day I was somewhere and I mentioned something to this effect, and I said that, craftspeople need to be given recognition and things, because otherwise, why on earth should they want to continue? And a lady who was there said, no, I love crafts and I always, buy crafts and I encourage them and I come to all your bazaars and I buy crafts. In fact, the other day she said, the other day I bought a beautiful sari from Daskar, and it was so beautiful that I had a lunch party to celebrate the sari and show it. So I said to her, did you invite the weaver who made it? And she looked at me like this, as if, what an extraordinary thing to say. So, you can invite a painter, even not a very good painter, to your house for lunch, but to invite a weaver, oh my God. So, I think our attitudes naturally affect the craftspeople's attitudes about themselves. And we have to change that. We have to make it something that they aspire to do, not something that they're doing just because. Uh, Interestingly, COVID, which was such a heavy black cloud over our country for the last 2.5 years, and did disastrous things to the craft sector because they lost their markets, they lost their buyers from abroad, they lost orders, orders were cancelled, did have a couple of interesting and positive knock on effects. And one of these was the trail. I think we all saw those really saddening pictures of migrant labor trekking homewards to their villages after the first COVID wave, when they were left without any kind of compensation. They had no social security, they had no future, and they came in these waves back to their villages where didn't have much opportunity. And so I think a lot of the craftspeople and weavers who had stayed in the villages, continuing their familial occupations, not very enthusiastically, and wondering whether this was the right route and whether they shouldn't also migrate to the cities, suddenly realized that, my God, we do have something of value in our hands and in our heads, in our family memory of skills. Because here we are sitting at home, we might not have orders and sales, but we can build up a buffer of stocks for the future. We do have something to offer. And interestingly, a lot of young craftspeople who had migrated from Bihar, from Orissa, from Kutch, from Rajasthan, started going back, and I can name many, many of them. And because they came back with some sort of knowledge of the world, some basic literacy in English and Hindi and so on, it became easy for them to set an example and offer something back to their parents. So that was one good thing. The second good thing was really the internet. We all, I think, in the craft sector had resisted the internet, saying that craft was a touchy feely thing. How would we project it? How would we sell it? And we were resistant. But during lockdown and what, there was no other means of selling craft. So NGOs went onto the internet and set up their websites, and a lot of young craftspeople did as well. They made their brands. Some of them are deliciously funny, the names they've chosen for themselves. But there they are, and they're dealing directly with their buyers. They're talking to them on WhatsApp or Zoom. They're putting up their products for people to see. They're taking instruction from buyers from abroad as well as in India. And they're also interestingly learning the prices at which their products are sold all over the world, which in many cases had been hidden from them very carefully. So that has given them a lot of confidence and a feeling that we are able to go it alone. We need not be exploited. And they're getting a lot of ideas from Google and Pinterest. And uh, they've all learned how to maneuver social media. And I myself, during these 2 years, quite frustrated at not being able to travel and do workshops, did some of these on Zoom and on WhatsApp video. And even a craftswoman, an embroiderer from Banaskantha, Bihar, who doesn't even know how to write or read, but she understands, a drawing or a color, which one puts on the thing. And she certainly understands when you give her a thumbs up, and then she'll blow you kisses, because all craftspeople love emojis. So I think there's good news and bad news. But we all have to play a part. I don't think we can anguish at dying crafts, or we can't necessarily rejoice because some crafts are coming into circulation again. We all have to realize that whether we are buying craft, admiring craft, writing about craft, or working with craftspeople, we all have something that we have to do if we want them to endure, and that one of them, the main thing, is to include them in the process of communication and planning, and to never forget that between every product that you buy, there is a craftsperson, and he or she needs to be valued.
I'll just, Laila and Uzramma and I are going to be in conversation, so we'll keep talking to each other and with you all. When Laila talked about, did the weaver get invited to a meal, and why was not the weaver invited? I suddenly remembered Eduardo Galeano's famous poem, The Nobodies. I don't know if you like it or don't, but it's one of my most favorite poems. And he writes, the nobodies, nobody's children, owners of nothing, the no ones, the no-bodied, running like rabbits, dying through life, screwed every which way, who don't speak languages but dialects, who don't have religions but superstitions, who don't create art but handicrafts, who don't have culture but folklore, who are not human beings but human resources, who do not have names but numbers, who do not appear in the history of the world but in the police blotter of the local newspaper. So in a sense, what you have done, Laila, and what you've done, Uzramma, and what this whole sector has done, and so many people in the audience have done, has made them people. So they were really nobodies. One did not know the name of any craftsperson. But today in India, we know at least a few very famous craftspeople. The pad creators, we know about the people who paint, at least we know where they live or that they exist. And I think that is since the time of Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay and the early days of crafts in India. We have done much better in some ways than other countries, but we still have a lot to do. So, Uzramma, what would be your comments on this? And to add to Laila's?
I agree with all that. I agree, of course, with what Laila said.
What is the first time you've ever said anything like this?
Don't worry, there's plenty I disagree with. And you will hear about that when I get into my stride. But some of the things you said are absolutely I'm in tune with. And that is that we don't give enough respect to craftspeople. And of course, since the days of Kamala Devi, we have come a long way. But there is a lot to do. And I hope all of us in this room will go ahead and do many of the things that we can still do.
You have to say something more than that.
No,
You want to show your slides?
Yeah.
Before you show your slides, let me say that the work you have done, actually, India, we mustn't forget that India started with khadi, not really as a statement of handicraft, but as a statement of power and politics to the people. And so the weaving of cloth has had a special significance in the history of this country and to you and me who fight for people's rights. So khadi, and the way khadi has actually been treated and the way it has gone down in the economic stratification, I won't go into other details because I know it becomes too political, but nevertheless, khadi has disappeared from the economic horizon of most of us. And those of us who can really afford khadi really can't, we are very special people. Because most people can't afford khadi. The person who spins the yarn can't afford the khadi today. And of course, what does khadi mean? That it's hand-spun yarn and hand-woven cloth. Handloom is just it could be mill-spun yarn, but handloom is a hand-operated loom. And this difference is something, of course, we grew up with. And Gandhiji made huge politics of it. So Uzramma's contribution to keeping the loom alive, the handloom alive, and getting our attention to the process of weaving is a huge political comment. Today we are talking about the politics of craft. If Laila has brought crafts into the mainstream of Indian urban life, definitely, and therefore rural life. We have a great debt to Uzramma because she's kept the politics of cotton, khadi. Khadi, maybe or maybe not, she'll tell us what it is. We will listen to what she has to say. So we must place her in the politics of raising that issue, which is so vital, a skein in our political thinking. So, Uzramma?
So it's wonderful to be here, so close to Barefoot College and SWRC. I have actually been at a distance from it, but always admired it a lot from a distance. And congratulations on your 50th anniversary, and thank you for inviting me to the celebrations. So I read the notes that Aruna and Noshin Khan, she's not here, I think. Is she here? Yeah, that a note that you both wrote together. So I read that with mixed feelings. On the one hand, I agree wholeheartedly when they say the craft sector is one of the most sustainable and green parts of the economy. This is something that we forget, that people all over the world are looking for green industries. And we have this huge green industry that we're really not paying the attention it deserves. And of course, also when they slam the government, because all the governments in succession, except for the first 5 years, I think, isn't it, Aruna? They have absolutely treated the craft sector rather badly. Not rather badly, very badly. And each one comes in with all kinds of promises. And then, there are some quite, I think, rather silly things like Handloom Day. I mean, out of 365 days, you want one day to be a Handloom Day? And, we have, still have, in spite of all the crafts that have disappeared, we still have over 4 million weavers, let alone all the other crafts. And you're going to wear that cloth on one day? Anyway, I would leave that. It's also true that many artisans do not wish their children to continue the trade. And I would say that I wouldn't either, because the earlier generation has been treated so badly by all of us. They have not been able to make a good living. So who will want their child to go into something when they have seen their parents not having a very good time? But I don't agree with Aruna and Noshin when they say that the crafts production has been reduced only to upmarket handicrafts and that all their produce has been reduced to non-essential. So that I hope to show a few examples of when that has not happened. And some from different parts of the country, some bright sparks in the whole gloomy scenario. And I don't want to take up the rest of the evening talking about it, so I've chosen just a few things, but I assure you that there are many more. And here are a few that I have been able to round up. So this is about khadi. Now, I know khadi is in a very bad way, but this came in, there was a little notice in the paper the other day. I don't know if you saw it. This particular one is from the New Indian Express, and it was on the 27th of October. So whenever we say that, khadi is in a very bad way, actually, if you want to go into the politics of what is happening in khadi, it's a very depressing scene. But then here you are, khadi itself is doing well, and it's actually the sales have been increasing. Oh, sorry, this is the wrong way. So it's true that traditional weaver families don't want their children to go into the craft. But then, on the other hand, there are groups of new weavers who are not carrying that burden. And this is a picture of Siwan district in Bihar, where these looms have been set up. And because the household also needs the woman to come and work in the household, and quite often they have also farm work to do, the people who have set it up have rationed the loom time. So each loom is allowed to be run for 4 hours in the morning and 4 hours in the afternoon. And as the person who runs it in the morning gets up, the other person who takes over that loom for the afternoon shift, she's dying to start working on the loom. So they have a completely different attitude to weaving. And there you see the person waiting to take over as one is finishing. And what happens in the household, usually, there's a lot of kit-pit between the mother-in-law and the daughters-in-law, and they don't really have much to do with each other except fight with each other. So instead of which, they've got the people who organize them have got these people to start spinning. So they've got a lot to talk about. So then they have sort of little competitions amongst each other. Did the old lady spin more this today? Or did the bahu spin more? And the sisters-in-law. So the household also becomes a happier place. So it all has social outcomes also. So I think Aruna was also talking about this, or was it Laila, that there's a lot of reverse migration. So this person who's at the loom is a young weaver called Babali from Gopalpur in Orissa, in Jaipur district in Orissa. And he thought, as many young weavers from villages now think, that, there's a great big world out there and I can do much better and learn a lot more and earn a lot more than sitting here in my village working at this loom which my father worked before me. So he went off and he tried all kinds of different things. He worked on a power loom in Surat. He worked on machine embroidery on saris in Tamil Nadu. And he worked on various different things. In all these places, he lived in very urban, slummy conditions. And his salary of about 7,000 rupees a month in most of these places was hardly enough to cover his living expenditure. And he got sick. He started getting nosebleeds and he didn't understand why. Anyway, after a few months, he got sick of it and he came back and he's now back to his tussar weaving. Most of Orissa is tussar weaving. And then he even recently has won an award for it. So he's quite happy now weaving there. And he has also influenced the others from his cohort who wanted to go to different places. And he has told them what a miserable time he had. And he's been part of this great reverse migration where 50% of the weavers from Gopalpur who went to different places have now come back and are working on their family looms. So this is about a cooperative in Andhra that my organization, Malka, has been working with for quite a long time. And they're a fairly small cooperative. They have between 40 and 50 weavers working with them. And what they do is that they go and have a stall at this weekly market. There's a market on the railway line between Chennai and Calcutta. And it has its own station, and wholesale buyers come from both places. And the market runs for 3 days in the week, and it's a huge market where there are all kinds of textiles. And so Pulagurta has one stall there. I don't know how this thing is. Oops. Yeah, so I'm sorry, your gadget is not very. This is the Pulagurta market. Anybody who reads Telugu can see that's the sign of the Pulagurta cooperative. So in Dwarpuri market, and sales are 40 crores per week. And Pulagurta, just this little cooperative with a few handlooms, is the only handloom cooperative there. And they do manage to have sales of 22 lakhs every week. Now, this is again, going back to the things that we have been thinking about. All crafts has gone up market, and people make things that only for the niche markets and for the elite and so on. These pictures are from the camel herders of Kutch. And these are camels that are a bit different from other camels because they also swim in water. And here you see things made from their own leather for their own use. So on the left, there's the picture of the boy drinking from the musk, from the water thing. And on the right, I just love this picture, is a bucket made of leather. which is used to draw water from the well. So they make this, they don't go to the market at all. This is made for their own use. They also make chappals and belts and saddles, but everything is for their own use, and it is made from their own raw materials, and they know how to process it, and they make it for them. They make the products for themselves. Now, this is the last slide, and this is how in Malkha we are trying to extend the production chain from just the actual craftspeople also to the farmers who grow the cotton. So recently we were invited to a seminar by an organization of organic farmers, and we showed them all the products that can be made from their cotton, because what happens is the farmers live in their own world and they don't know what happens to the cotton once they sell it. They sell the lint, or they sell the cotton with the seeds or without the seeds. But then they were quite interested, in fact they were quite riveted to when we showed them the kind of products that are made from their own cotton. And so that is one of the things that Malkha is trying to do. We're trying to extend the knowledge of craft to the people who are concerned with it, but not directly involved in it. So thank you very much.
And weaving somehow, I don't know whether it's because of Kabir and because Kabir was a weaver, and Kabir को याद करते हुए हमारे बुनकर लोग भी बहुत सोचते हैं कि हमारा भी एक कवि है, you know, that kind of, and many of them are bhajanchis, and there are people who know Kabir, illiterate people know his songs, etc. So somehow weaving has lost the stigma. But I can't say of leather. Leather work definitely has a stigma even today. And even amongst the leather workers in Rajasthan, there are three. There's one who works on leather but won't tan it. And just below that is the caste that tans the leather. And at the rock bottom is the person who repairs your chappals. So you have the chamar or the berwa, you have the regar, and you have the mochi. And they don't marry into each other's communities. So when we have something like leather, then we really have a big lapse. And do you know this charas that you showed, this bucket? Beautiful. The first exhibition we had in Triveni in 75, we brought tiny buckets. And I remember we got about 24 buckets, absolutely as they were made. And they were just gone. And they were so beautiful. But today, ever since this electrical contraption called the pump has come in, electric pump, diesel pumps have come in, irrigation has lost its music. And I don't know, at the end we can ask them to sing what they used to sing when the charas went down and the charas came up, and we used to just hear the songs and we knew, oh, there's irrigation going on there, there, and there. Now that's gone and you just hear this hideous pump noise. The charas is gone also. So for the leather workers and other communities where craftspeople are really suffer from stigma, what is the future? Because leather has really largely, and look at me, look at what I'm wearing on my feet. Because of my knees and my back, and I have to have cushioned whatever it is. We've all gone into other kinds of footwear, and we no longer buy their footwear is finished. So things that they used to do traditionally has gone in, and a new range has come in. So I just thought, would you like to say something about Laila?
Well, I have to agree with you that that is one section of craftspeople for whom solutions are still being found, and I don't think they're in the near future. But there are a lot of new materials which are being created out of, banana skins, of the different types of hide. Shrishti School in Bangalore has done some very innovative work, creating materials which look and feel exactly like leather, luckily don't smell like leather, and have the same qualities of pliability and things. So I think that we have to think of that. We have to think a little bit out of the box. And we have to think of whether it is leather workers or whether it's potters or whether it's weavers or whoever, we have to look at them as a challenge in the same way as we would in any other sector of the economy. You know, rather than just assume that, oh, this doesn't have a future, so how sad, because that's the end of that profession. I think that if we can innovate, I mean, just as the most extraordinary materials are being made, even in fabrics, out of nettles, out of the water hyacinths, there's so much innovation happening. And I mean, the Japanese, for instance, the Chinese, the kind of work that they're doing with different kinds of materials. I think we should invite some of these young people from our IITs and things to join in it. Because working with craftspeople is not just about showing them how to design new products. It's also teaching them to deal with the challenges of the 21st century and also to take advantage of the technology of the 21st century. So I'm not utterly despairing. In the meantime, I am wearing, I told you in the afternoon the story of one of our Ranthambore sort of leather workers. And so they use all their uppers and things are block printed by the women in the center. The soles are recycled materials and things. So, and they're doing extraordinarily well. Unfortunately, the stigma that they come from families who were traditionally leather workers is still there. So there is work to be done. But I do think that there are solutions for leather because after all, that's not entirely a problem that is exclusive to India. Maybe the fact that we have leather craftspeople is, but in Europe and all also, there is now a growing school of environmentalists who are against the use of leather. And so I hope that something will come out and we will have the extraordinary skills that they have in punching and plaiting and embroidering on leather, but they will transfer them to other more ecological and friendly and socially acceptable materials.
Uzramma, I salute you for all your wonderful work, and when you mentioned lakhs and crores, my eyes just went wide with wonder. And it's amazing what you've done. But we have not been able somehow to get inexpensive cotton back, you know. We have expensive cotton and it's wonderful. I mean, I wear saris given to me and I'm wearing a sari which is not what I usually wear today in your honor. And I think that, you know, there are things that we cherish and wear, and actually my elitism is often declared by my clothes. As soon as I go and I'm wearing cotton, then everybody knows, हाँ ये तो अमीर घर की औरत है. Because, you know, गरीब घर में तो हम पहनते नहीं हैं, हम तो polyester पहनते हैं, you know. So somehow that transition, that because you see, popular, for me it would be wonderful if all the Rajasthani women went back to cotton ghagras and logris. We have completely switched to polyester. And I remember once talking to Laila Sampson when she was director of Kalakshetra, and I said, oh, how about those lovely, beautiful saris that made in Kalakshetra? Of course, it's also one of my alma maters, and I have a very special spot for it. So I said, oh, what about those lovely saris? She told me, Aruna, everyone's dripping and drying. So for me, the disconnect between people who produce the stuff and the stuff itself, and how can we get that going? Of course, as I said this afternoon, there was Jayalalitha brought this beautiful cotton sari for 100 rupees. It was called, what sari was it called? I don't know, Janta sari maybe. She produced them in thousands. She kept co-optics going and the saris in the market. And I own some of those saris. And it's like silk, it's very beautiful cotton. And I wonder if the Tamil women wore those saris in the villages. But I certainly saw Odia women wearing cotton. Yeah. And it was so wonderful to see those Odia women wearing the beautiful cottons that they weave. Complicated ones. And of course, an Ikat weaver is a mathematician. because to get those weaves perfectly right, and you tie and dye the yarn in a manner in which it comes out in that pattern, has always been for me a very awesome thing. So what do you think about this disconnect between the people who produce the stuff and what they wear and their...
These mics working? Yeah, I'll answer that in a rather tangential way. You know, we had a big event in Chirala in 2018 where we had 250 weavers all talking to each other. And the textile minister wanted to know which was the department that had sponsored that. And I think was quite horrified to find that we didn't have any government sponsorship. But these people had come by themselves, and they exchanged their techniques with each other. We had a weaver from Laos, and there's a film about the whole thing which you can look at. It's available on the internet. But what I want to talk to you about is at that event, we also had 9 people from China. And usually, you know, people think of China as sort of way ahead of us in this race of progress towards modernity. But these people who came from China, there was one particular woman who was the head of what we call the sarpanch of her village in China. She was starting hand weaving there. And she said there used to be hand weaving, and in fact she said, I was born under my mother's loom. And so she showed us some what we would really be quite ashamed to show. It's like sort of kindergarten weaving. They were mats, bamboo mats, sort of woven together with thick cotton thread. And very proudly she showed us this. And she said that we are starting our weaving again. And so the Chinese people that came to our weaving event, are thinking of India as a teacher for hand weaving and also for indigo dyeing. So they wanted the seeds of indigo. We gave them the seeds. And, you know, people told us that you must never give them these things. Somebody was saying, I think it was Sanjeevni maybe, who was saying that if you show Chinese people something, they can copy it and make it cheaper. But they want the real thing from us. They wanted to learn the real thing. They didn't want to learn what we call German indigo, which is synthetic indigo. They wanted to know how the real thing. They came to our indigo dyeing vats, looked at the vats, took photographs. They took seeds from us. I don't know what's happened. That was 2018. We haven't heard from them since. So I don't know if they managed it or they didn't manage it. The whole thing is a flop. Or they're waiting to stun the world with Chinese indigo. Yeah, COVID, but then this was 2018, long before COVID. So they had time to do something. But what I'm trying to say is that, you know, China has actually been through that whole process of modernization before us. There's no doubt that they were ahead of us. And now they are at that process, they realize how much they have lost and that how dry their life has become without all the richness of craft. So they're again looking to us to learn from us all the things that we think we now should be throwing away.
Actually, you've raised one extremely important issue, which is that someone said, what is it, what India, amazing India, what was it that? You're proud to be Indian? Well, what are you proud of? What are you proud of to be Indian? And all the wrong things come up now, in my opinion. You don't mention the weaving or the architecture, or you don't mention the multi-layered and multicultural architecture that's India.
And you also don't talk about the low levels of nutrition.
But you don't. You know, you don't, of course, talk about those things which I talk about all the time. But if you look at crafts, if you don't talk about our extraordinary qualities that we have, and India is so rich, it's still very rich, and we must maintain this richness. We must understand how important it is and what an important heritage that is. But at the same time, the person who produces all this is on the verge of, always on the verge of need. Whether it's the weavers, or whether it's the potters, or whether it's the, and of course, even the musicians we heard just earlier this evening. All of them are on the verge of need, and we don't look at their economic conditions. We just look at their products. I'm not saying about the three of us. We look at more. But generally speaking, it's just the product that attracts attention. Nobody thinks of the person behind it. And how will we get people to think of the craftsperson behind it, Laila, so that they get a little more sensitive to the disparities in income, to the disparities in access to essential services, to hospitals, to schools, and also the dignity that we talked about, the dignity of that particular profession?
I think that, and I'm not being entirely flippant, that the solution is our own frailty. India is always very influenced by what other countries are doing. And when we see the Chinese coming year after year and taking our bangle makers, our Kolhapuri chappal makers, our Kanjivaram sari weavers, our chicken embroiderers back to China to teach the Chinese, and then those products become very popular in the West, and the West has now started talking of India as a model for green and slow fashion and all the right things. Suddenly we wake up and we say, hey, you know, that's been around in India for a long time, and maybe we will start appreciating ourselves a little more. Just the way that how agitated people got when the US started selling neem toothpaste and basmati rice and trying to patent it. So I think that when those waves of consciousness come back from there to here and young people see it, maybe they'll start thinking, hey, that's quite interesting, that's worth preserving. I'm proud to be an Indian because we know handloom weaving.
You see, our generation believed in sort of hitting the nail on the head. Whether we are on stage or not, we speak our minds. And I think speaking your mind is now in jeopardy. So we won't go there. We'll come back to what we have to say to each other. And, you know, actually, we were talking earlier on about how extremely difficult it is to access raw materials for our craftspeople. And I repeat what I said earlier, but I feel personally very guilty for not paying as much attention to the mobilizing of craftspeople as I did to agricultural labor, for instance. So they got together and we got MGNREGA, we protested. We got many million signatures to Parliament Street. But they were all on cloth, by the way. They were on cloth, on dhotis and towels and saris. But we never paid attention to a huge protest by weavers when long staple yarn was exported and they couldn't access yarn, and that resulted in so many weavers committing suicide. Why have we in this sector not looked at unionizing as a means of at least accessing raw materials, accessing the right to it as citizens of this country, constitutional citizens of this country? What do you think kept us from doing all that?
Well, when I write my past history, which I may do sometime, and the relevant baddies in that history are all safely in their graves, then I can tell the story of when Atal Bihari Vajpayee was a prime minister. We had a huge protest, and we went all the way. We took the huge numbers of weavers, I'm sorry to say traveling without tickets, on the train.
Sorry, we have a right to travel.
Anyway, so there we were, and we went there, and there was a bill being passed that was sort of very anti-handloom, that, you know, it could be sold at the same something as Paolo or something like that. we got him to withdraw the bill. And it will be there somewhere in the parliamentary history. And and the leaders of that was the leader of our local weavers union. So at some point you must come, Aruna, and we will introduce you to our fellow worker, the leader of the weavers union of Andhra. And he is absolutely fiery. You will enjoy meeting him. And he is a political person, and he believes in the politics of the craft.
Subsequently, what happened? I mean, we have to keep fighting that. The thing that I realize as an activist is there's no slumber possible. When you get something and you have to fight to maintain it, to keep it, to not let it corrode, and there's no sleep for not the wicked, but no sleep for those who want something done. There's no peace, I think, either. You keep battling. Now, why didn't they battle on? Because there were so many other threats that loomed up.
What the government has done now, the NIA, the National, they put a case against him. And so the optimistic thing is that the second time it has come up in court, the judge has said, I don't see any evidence. That he's being accused of, the usual thing, urban Naxal, that kind of thing. So that's what we have to fight against when we're trying to, and these are the weapons they use against people like Mohan Rao. And the only reason is that what we reckon is that they don't like associations of people. And so they're making an example of Mohan Rao because he's not,
Yeah, and he was never present in Chhattisgarh.
No.
The whole thing is a complete cook-up. But it does seem as if the local administration and the legal people feel that...
No, this is not local. This is from the center. NIA.
Yes, I know, but I'm saying that the judges who's trying the case is also saying, he said, I just can't see how ridiculous this is. But we were talking about getting craftspeople together, and whether it was for raw material or whether it was to change legal things. And I know that Dastkar has been sort of at this for a long, long time because we felt we were in a very advantageous position working all over India with all kinds of crafts. But actually it is very, very difficult to bring them together because they themselves are so diverse. We were somewhere they're Ansaris, somewhere they're Wankars, they're women in Assam, they're mainly women weavers, this and that. And they don't actually feel such a commonality unless there's something like when the Handloom Act was being twice, actually Dastkar has been part of that, once in the 90s when they were changing the Handloom Act, and it was actually the Ambanis who were trying to say that withdraw the legislature which says that certain types of weaves and certain kinds of motifs can only be made by handloom weavers. So at that time we were able to get quite a cross-section of people, and also MLAs and MPs who come from weaving districts who joined in this. So at that time, again, we were successful in having that stop. Then again, 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, they tried a similar thing to say that the handloom legislation is pretty bad anyway, but they were trying to take away just the few little bits of it which were useful. Even then, we did a signature campaign which went into several lakhs of people, but most of the signatories were not weavers, it was people who were concerned about weaving. And it's quite difficult to get, it's easier to get small groups of craftspeople into a society or something, or a local issue. But to get them to join on a national level is very, very hard. And I think it's something that can't be done as part of a larger program. It has to be one organization which just goes at it all the time. But it is very important because, the one thing that governments, whatever color and constituency they are, the one thing they understand is votes. And it is a huge vote bank if we were able to mobilize them. But how one does it, I don't know. And I hope it isn't some terrible catastrophe which will bring everyone together.
I think we'll have to make Uzramma talk now about something.
I also
No.
told you about our political activities.
Yes, of course you did.
And I told
But-
you about how China envies us. And how we had this big event where all these people came and the textile minister asked which was the department that organized it. Told you all my stories. The thing that I can talk about for a long time is that the whole spinning process that we use.
Yes, please, let's hear that.
But yeah, I think that...
Not for a long time, but for a short time we can hear that.
No,
Tell us about the yarn, this Malka. I mean, how did you...
See, when you look at things in detail, as you all know, everybody knows, you find quite an interesting picture, what you haven't realized when you look at things in a very general way. So once I started looking at spinning, actually it was a colleague of mine who did the actual research. And what we found is that the spinning machines that we use today, which everybody uses, except Khadi, which does the hand spinning. Even Malka uses the same machines, but on a smaller scale. They were invented in the West. They were invented for American cotton, because though it was invented mostly to suit the yarn producers, the mills were in England, but the cotton they used at that time came from the US. And the cotton which was grown there had long staples. So now the machines that we use today, demand long staple, when actually the specialization in the whole Indian subcontinent is not on long staple. We made the best cottons, the finest cottons that the world has ever seen. 600 count. I don't know if people understand this count thing. Dhaka muslins. Yeah. And they were some...
higher the count, the
finer, yeah. So we made these famous Dhaka muslins, which were known as Abe Rama, and they were apparently, there are legends like when the Princess Jahanara came to the court of her father, the emperor, he said, "You're not properly dressed." And she said, "But I'm wearing 7 layers. So, and then how cows would eat up this fine cloth on the grass because it was absolutely invisible, and so on and so on. So all this very fine cloth was made from medium staple yarn. For instance, in the area which is now West Bengal, which is now Bangladesh, it was made from a cotton which was known as puti cotton, and which grew on the banks of the Meghna River. And this was medium staple, local cotton, and that was what was used to make that very fine cloth. And even today, the fine cloth that we make in Ponduru, in the north of Andhra Pradesh, is made from a variety that we call, that local thing, is called Kondapati. And it is a desi variety, and it's medium staple. It's not long staple at all. But for the machine, now when you say good quality cotton, it is cotton that suits the machine, not suits the cloth that is made from the machine. So good quality cotton is long staple cotton. And we have something called ELS, which is extra long staple, which is imported. And so we export our ordinary cotton. China is one of the big buyers of our cotton. USA and China are big buyers of our cotton. And we import this extra long staple for the sake of this wretched machinery. And
I just want to know why. I mean, this is Bangalore, technology city. Just as we have asked questions as women, why women's work has never drawn the attention of the technologists. Why haven't Indian technologists looked at this issue? Why can't we produce machines, handlooms that take our middle staple yarn? Why? What has happened?
It's not the handlooms, it's the machinery, spinning machinery.
The spinning machinery.
Yeah.
But our handlooms take it.
Yeah.
Yeah, handlooms take it. But even if we need to produce more mill cotton, which will be cheaper, say, for people to buy than handloom, it's better than polyester. Why don't we look at these issues? Do you think they're important to be looked at?
You have to make the difference between the spinning stage and the weaving stage.
Okay, tell us.
See, that mill woven cloth is still made from the same yarn which is woven on the same machinery which is imported, the design is imported from the West. And that is what demands the long staple. And that's what gets our farmers into trouble, because it doesn't suit our farmers. So we had lots of suicides of cotton farmers, lots of farm suicides, many of which were cotton farmers, because growing that kind of cotton, because our local varieties are Gossypium arboreum and Gossypium herbaceum. And the American variety is Gossypium barbadense and, sorry, I forget the name, but anyway, it's not the same. I mean, it's different in its physical makeup also. And that cotton needs irrigation. And when you have irrigation in a field, pests love it, insects love it. So you have more pests in any case, regardless of that BT and whatever. Whereas our desi cotton grew in a non-irrigated way, with natural rains. And it was used to be grown on a small scale. Everything that we used to do was on a small scale. So in the owners of that field, which would be 2 acres, 5 acres, they would grow one row of a different crop, which was a millet. And then they would grow the cotton. So first of all, it was less likely to... Cotton is naturally also very depleting of the soil and very prone to pests. So when you grow it with other crops, it reduces all that. And then you were able to pick it with your own household labor. That's how it was traditionally done. And then you kept the seeds. And the farmer themselves kept the seeds. They kept it in a matti handi over the cooking pot, so the smoke kept the insects off. And they used the best seeds, of course, were kept for the next crop. And all these cycles were broken when we started getting American cotton. Because one of the reasons that we use American cotton, one is that the staple is longer, and the other is that that plant is much more productive. So you get the quantity, you lose the quality. But the Western people never understood the qualities of cotton. We know cotton, we've been growing it for 1,000 years, but to them it's new. So we lost a lot of the desi varieties because of that. So I'm sorry you started me on the subject.
I'm not sorry, because I don't think many of us, probably all of us in the audience, know anything about it at all. And while we argue for technological intervention at so many levels, we didn't know the cotton that we love so much needed so much attention from a kind of technological attention that you have drawn to it. So thank you very much. The design and one thing that we all flounder with is design and marketing. The traditional designs, yes, but when they go completely berserk. I went to Kanjivaram about 10 years ago, and I couldn't bear the designs they had made. Maybe I'm a traditionalist, maybe I'm whatever I am, but I couldn't take those designs because Kanjivaram traditionally meant extraordinary harmony in colors and patterns and designs and in weaves and so on. What happens when we move from the traditional design, which is so perfect in every way possible, to new designs? Why is there such a disaster, Laila?
Well, I think it is once again allowing someone who's pretty ignorant about both the tradition as well as the market to come in between. And how many of these interventions have really come from either government or government-sponsored schemes where they feel that, craftspeople, they're making the same sort of things for hundreds of years, they suddenly need an injection of something exciting, and they commission some designer or some design students who have not had time to really study anything about either the tradition or the technique of that particular place, and send them off. And those kids very often flick through some magazines and see something and try to replicate it. It's again a question of the craftsperson having the confidence to say, this is my tradition, this is what comes harmoniously. Change it a little, tweak it a little, show me what the colorways that are trending in the city are, but then let me do it, rather than somebody giving them a piece of paper or a photograph or a drawing and saying, make this. And very often, the people who come in between, whether it's the traders or the exporters or whatever, have no idea and are also pretty fly by night. They come and think that, let's make this. Such and such a movie came out and Hema Malini wore this, so let's make some versions of it. And, we've gone through this. We've had Tutti Frutti saris, we've had Sputnik saris. Someone showed me a picture of a pallo which had 7 incarnations of Prime Minister Modi with different headgear. And so, and I mean, if somebody commissions a weaver to make something or tells them that this is going to trend and this is going to be popular, it did trend, it went viral on social media, but I don't think anyone bought it. They laughed at it. So, I always say that I don't actually like this word designer for people who work in crafts. I think they need to do product development. I think they need to adapt. And that basically any design intervention, however much you want to contemporize it, and things do change, has to be based on the unique signature of that particular craft, or that, in the case of handloom weaving, in that particular region. There's a reason for why they made those patterns. There's a reason why it went with their technique. You can't do, for instance, chicken embroidery in a rectangular design because your needle doesn't flow that way. It's very, very difficult to get sharp angles. And so that's why chicken embroidery is all flowing and flowers and bales and things. In Pulkari embroidery, on the other hand, you have to have straight lines and sharp edges because that's the way the needle moves in that particular tradition. If you don't know it, you can make a terrible mess. But craftspeople are far too polite with all of us who go and try and fiddle. And they just look at us and say, हाँ ये बहन जी दिल्ली से आई है, उनको पता होगा कि मार्केट में लोग फुलकारी को गोल पसंद करते हैं और चिकन एम्ब्रॉयडरी को सीधा ऐसा ऐसा कटवर्क चाहिए. So, what are you to do? And so once again, it's a question of letting a craftsperson not just be a passive pair of hands, completely at the mercy of anyone who comes and has the money to commission something, and of having the strength of character to be able to say, that is ghastly, I'm not making it. I think my phone has similar sentiments.
How right you are. But we still have, I know, we've been told, all the people who are working with crafts, the NGOs especially, they're always told, oh, your designs are not all right, you have to improve, you can't produce the same thing over and over again. And
Aruna, because
no, actually, there's the other thing that I want to tie on to that, is that, traditionally, you made things over and over again. That's given you a kind of continuity, given you a kind of familiarity. But at the same time, there were variations. Yeah. You could never, I used to be exasperated in Rajasthan. You gave something and you said, gave the thread, the cloth, the wool, and said, do this, and it would be maroon and you'd get back red. And you'd say, bhaiya, ye diya tha. They say, 19-20 ka hi to farak hai. There's a famous phrase in Rajasthan, which means 19 and 20, what does it differ? What does it make a difference? So at that level, they've been very creatively fluid. Yeah. But in terms of making the same thing over and over again, there's a kind of psychological mismatch, I think.
Yeah. But because every time you make something again with your hands, if in a machine it's obviously easier to replicate the exact thing, it sort of gets watered down. But there are two things I want to say to that. One is that craft has actually never been static. Craft has always been made in India for someone else. It's not like art, which is supposed to be just the painter's interpretation. So they've always made it for a market. The market has shifted. And also that craft was never static. I remember when I was working in Kutch, you could show a Rabari woman 2 pieces of embroidery, both with a peacock on them, and she could tell you which year each was made because of the variations in shape, of color, of depiction, the way the peacock's neck curved and some things and that. So, I mean, this is also not something that it's an either or, that you take something as craft which is eternal and should be like this forever, or you contemporize it and change it. Craft has always responded to the market and the consumer. The problem is that today the market and consumer has shifted from being their next door neighbor or the local Raja or the local temple, and it has gone into these cities of Bombay and Delhi and Bangalore and sometimes abroad. So then they need somebody to interpret them, which is why that 40 years after we started them, we still do bazaars. We could just do orders, we could just do online, but the bazaar is a learning space for craftspeople where they meet their consumers, they see how they react. You know, you can go tell a craftsperson till you're blue in their face that, you know, you've done beautiful embroidery, but your cushion cover has to be 18 inches square, otherwise no one will buy it. And they think, God, this woman is really silly. I've done this beautiful work. They're going to sit on this bloody cushion. What difference does half an inch here or there make? And then they come to the bazaar and they have people lifting up this cushion and saying, it's beautiful design, but you know, it's not a square. And suddenly that tube light comes on and says, oh, you know, Benji was not so nutty after all. So I think that's very important, communication. I think communication is the most important thing in a country like India, which is so diverse, and all of us are working at different levels, come from different places, different types of education. Unless we communicate, we will end up with no crafts and a bloody communal riot.
So of course, we will end the conversation in another 5 minutes or 10 minutes. But since we are sitting near a bazaar, the Tilonia bazaar, and the bazaar has been all that you said and more, and that's the reason why it first came, to bring craftspeople directly and connect with the buyers and find out what goes, what doesn't go. And also this Gunnis beast just has to go, and you can't say, "Arey, theek hai, ye to itna hi hai, utna hi hai." Nevertheless, the bazaars have a limitation, as you say. It costs so much money to bring craftspeople to cities, and people, I don't know whether you find people willing to invest in it as much as they were before, or whether you're finding it difficult now with all this modernization. And I was in Bombay yesterday, and I was somewhat surprised by the fashions. And I don't think our young women in the village or people who make these garments have any idea of what people are wearing, and if they would even like to make such garments. But then they are there, and that's what's fashionable today. So I think it's a continual education, but it's also a question of raising finances for people to understand that if you really like craft, then not only do you have to buy the goods, but you have to make those bazaars possible, dastakar possible, or in a much smaller way, bazaar like this one happening possible. Get Malka to Rajasthan so that people can see and understand. And we need specialized bazaars, we need varied bazaars, we need all of that. And this interface also has to be an educational thing. And this evening is partly because I felt that people who are interested in craft must also understand it. You cannot just come and buy something and be happy about it, or even understand that there's something behind it, but not know the details. And I think the details are critically important. So would you like to say something in conclusion, both of you? And I think, Uzramma, I'm not letting you off the hook. You'll have to say something.
I've got, I think, fine. Well, yes, it is difficult, but we have to make that effort of getting craft out there, because the new consumer is definitely not necessarily only the bazaar consumer, but consumers in the cities which get bigger and bigger. It's not impossible to make it happen. I think it was about 22 years ago, Daskar decided that we have to be free of government funding. And at that time, in any case, foreign funding was drying up almost totally. So we did the math and the results were horrendous. We said, how can we? Because the funding was not only for bazaars, but also for the field trips and the design development and the skilling workshops that we were doing. But then we told, and why did we want to be free of government funding? Obviously because I was at the age where my hair was going grey, so I was invited onto government committees. But if I made a critical comment, then I was told that, how can you say this? Because after all, you're using government money. And I came back and I said, we have to be free to speak. And so when we told our craftspeople, because at the end of every bazaar, we usually have a workshop where we explain to them what's going to happen and what we are doing. And they said that, we find you of value and we are willing to pay some percentage. For that time, we never took anything for participation and all that. So they said, we are willing to pay for the stall rent and the advertising and all that. You tell us within a certain amount, if we can put that markup on our prices, and you think the product will still sell, we are happy to do it. We think Daskar is a good thing. So we very warily began that. And I'm very glad to say that 22 years later, we don't get funding from anywhere, except for new projects where we are starting an initiative in some area. But Daskar's infrastructure, admin, the bazaars themselves and all is all covered by what the craftspeople give us, minus 22% which we have to give the Delhi government. So it is possible, but you have to make it, you have to, I think, realize that a lot goes into marketing today, which is not always very congenial to us NGO types. And a lot of design development also. We cannot ignore that people today are not wearing saris as much as they did, and they want, another type of clothes. But you can still make that aesthetic and attractive. You don't have to go to the complete extreme. What is interesting to me, working with craftspeople all over India, is how different some craftspeople are. Kachis and to some extent the Rajasthanis, highly skilled, but they're very entrepreneurial. And if they feel something is skilled, a Rabari woman will happily make Mickey Mouse, while the women in, when I was working with Kasuti workers in Karnataka, North Karnataka, these women had 4 years of drought. They heard that someone had come to Hubli to look to Dharwad, and they walked 12 miles in the heat to come and see me because they heard that I might be giving work to them. But the first thing they said to me, they said, Benji, hum apne design nahi badlenge. We won't change our designs. They have significance, they have symbolism, they are linked to things. And mind you, most of these were Muslim women doing kasuti saris for Chandrakala wedding saris of Hindus, where the symbols of the chariot and the rats and everything are from Hindu mythology. But they said, we won't do it. And we won't make anything where the person has to sit on it. So we won't make cushion covers and bed covers. But saris, dupattas, anything, we'll work our fingers to the bone, but we will stick to our own thing. So there's a huge difference, and you have to listen to those voices. You can't say that, so where was I? So I think that design, like everything else to do with craft, has to be done sensitively, and it has to be a partnership. And it has to be something which benefits them and which they like. And we found that, thank God, they seem to like Daskar, And so we managed without government funds.
So we are also expanding our craft world, but we do it in slightly, in fact, quite a different way. We are bringing the cotton farmers into contact. When you saw that last slide, that was farmers looking at the yarn and so on. And we are working with a group of cotton farmers in a place called Jangaon, which is about 50 or 70 kilometers from where the weavers work. And the farmers are growing organic cotton, which we buy from them, which Malkha buys from them. And then our eventual goal is to get the farmers themselves to wear the cotton cloth that is made from their yarn, from their cotton. So this is a very slow way of spreading, but this is the way we want to do that. And the other thing that we're doing is that we have now the space that we have in this building which the Crafts Council of Telangana has built in Hyderabad. We have part of one floor of that. We rent it from the Crafts Council. And we plan to use that space. We are now developing what we call Malkha as a commons. So all that, getting the farmers close to the weavers is part of that. But as also part of that, we will get groups that work on completely different issues, non-profits, not necessarily NGOs, but for instance, the group that wants to protect the banyans, the Save the Banyans group. There was a huge hue and cry because they were increasing the width of a road, quite unnecessarily making it straight. If you just took a little curve, you would save 100 banyan trees, which are 100 years old. But they couldn't be bothered. Anyway, the Save the Banyans group managed to get that done. So they do that kind of thing. And we want them, we want to sort of, I wouldn't call it a partnership, but a sort of closer relationship with people like that. There's the LGBTQ group, there's a Save the Rocks group, there is a handicapped group, I forget the name of the thing. And there are groups like that. And so we are going to invite them to come to our space and think about how Malkha is really working on a similar kind of mandate. It may not be exactly the same thing as saving the banyans, but working in a different way towards a better world. The other thing that we're doing is that, we have at the moment 17 weavers weaving cloth for Malkha. And we have asked each weaver to make a different woven design, not with color, but just in the weave, different kind of designs in the weave. And each weaver, we have asked that they should make a design which they want to do. So, sometimes we feel that, weaving plain cloth might be, a bit too, I wouldn't say boring, but, your mind gets set into a certain pattern. But it's also good for them to have some difference and to think about what they're doing. So we've got 4 of those designs, and I wish I had pieces of it to show you. So each one of them is a different kind of weave, and all the designing is in the weave, and it's all done by the weavers themselves. So by the time I left, we had only got 4, but we're expecting to get 17 different designs. So we'll show it to you at some point. I don't know how and when, but anyway, you'll get to see. But basically, that is for the weavers themselves. So that's 2 of our different things. The other, we're doing experimentation on certain processes that people used to do, like oiling the yarn. And, the
cloth that people used to wear on their heads to protect them from the sun. That was oiled, and that was, it then got certain qualities that, prevented the sun from beating down on their heads. We're trying that. We're trying new materials for natural dyeing and so on. So we're in a very experimental state, and probably will continue to be forever.
We don't end the evening here. We are going to have comments from all of you. But I would like to thank, because people have a tendency to leave. So I would like to thank these two beautiful women with wonderful minds and who've been my companions and friends. Who have been my companion and friends for many decades, from whom I've taken great source, they've been my great source of energy and happiness for me. And today, at the end of this three-day exhibition or mela or bazaar or whatever you call it, I would have not ended it better than having you speak to us about what's going on outside. And my only regret is that we haven't spoken in Hindi, and people who actually do all the work have not really understood, but we will do a full translation for them of this evening. But all friends in the audience, we take so many things for granted and we don't really go beyond what we see. And today there's been a journey behind the things we see. And we take so much for granted, the beauty, the wonderful things that we buy and enjoy, how much there is behind it. And I think I have learned a great deal from this conversation. And I would personally like to thank both Uzramma and Laila. And I would like to thank BIC for giving us the space. I'd like to thank Azim Premji Foundation for making it possible. I want to do all the thanks now, though it doesn't end here. And I'll maybe thank everybody once again. They say I overdo it, but I think it's better to thank people twice than not thank them at all.
We thank you and we love being here.
Well, yesterday I was in Bombay, and the one thing that I felt that women have contributed to the discourse, that we are not ashamed of saying that we love something, love each other, love our work, and love what we're doing. And we are equally vociferous in saying what we think quite frankly and openly as we did today. So I think 3 cheers for 3 women, but for all women in the audience and for all of us. And now it's open to comments and to any issues we might like to raise or ask or comment on. Somebody will have to come and see who's first. Shweta, will you do that? Please take the mic and see who's... Oh, there's a mic there. So please walk to the mic so that we know you want to ask a question or make a comment.
Thank you so much. I hope I'm audible. I just wanted to ask you, since Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay's name came up in the beginning of the conversation, I wanted to know from you 3 about her influence on your meeting with her, that first interaction, and maybe give us a little sneak peek into the life of Kamala Devi through your work.
Yeah, because they say I'm the most inarticulate one, so they get me to do the... Kamala Devi was part of the nationalist movement of this country. And she saw to it that the crafts of India were part of that. And if you see the sad state of things in Pakistan, where that didn't happen, for that same period, they also had an independence, we also had our independence, but here, Kamala Devi saw to it, Kamala Devi and people who worked with her, And she saw to it that crafts had a very big part of Indian life.
Yes, and it's important to remember that she was not just a sort of handloom and handicraft lady. She had deep links in literature and founded many of the institutions that we today preserve: music, literature, the arts, and of course crafts. But I'm going to sort of tell you a little funny story. With Kamla Devi and my parents knew each other from Hyderabad and many, many years when they were all very young. And in her late years, where she became quite an iconic figure, and she was actually a very jolly, warm person. And I think she was a bit sad that everyone, stood up when she came into the International Center, and they all spoke to her very gravely and wanted words of wisdom, when she would quite like to have a little fun. So my father was always at hand, and then reminded her that the first time he ever met her, she was lying dressed in a very diaphanous see-through sari, not 7 layers of janara, and on a tiger skin thing, acting in some play in Hyderabad. And said, yeah, my father would say with a wink that, yeah, all these people think you're a very wise, good lady, but I know what you're really like. And she was a lovely person, and she was very influential to me. I always say about Kamla Devi that she was the Amma of craft. Pupul Jaikar was the Zarina, but Kamla Devi was our Amma.
Hello, my name is Mayura. I'm also an entrepreneur in the craft sector. And in fact, it was on my bucket list to take part in Dastakar's Nature Bazaar, which I'm very happy to say we did. And of course, Uzramma, I've met you before. So my question is, I live many of the challenges you've spoken about. And are there innovations in the craft sector that have been tried but maybe were ahead of its time, and maybe now the time is right to do something about it? Because, we talk about technology, we talk about design innovations, we talk about so many things that, it feels like the time is right, but maybe we can learn from, maybe mistakes that were made earlier and try to do it in a different way. Because we have to do something for the younger generation of artisans to continue. And it is a really serious problem.
Actually, we've been talking about it all day today, and that we feel it's the right time now to see how we can make Indian crafts, give it a status and an importance that it needs to be given. And towards this, we've been talking about how important it is to have more conversations in detail. Because, as Laila said, there's so many crafts with so many different kinds of issues. So that we've taken this decision today, for me, is extremely important. That all of us feel that we need to think more. All of us, women and one man, हम जो मिले थे आज दिन में, हमें ये निर्णय लिया कि अभी इसके बारे में सोचना बहुत ज़रूरी है और इसके ऊपर काम करना बहुत अति आवश्यक है. And what nature it will take will depend on all of you, because you'll all be part of the conversation at some point or the other. And we have to collectively do it. But firstly, we have to make sure that they don't get extinct as they have in many other countries. We have to prevent policy that ruins them. We have to prevent social conditions that are so harmful. Many of our craftspeople, I think more than 50%, I don't know if I'm right or wrong, Laila can correct me, are Muslims, and if we don't allow them space to live in peace and to live with amity and love, are we going to protect their craft? So these are questions we'll have to address and think of. And the Dalits, almost the rest of them are Dalits. There are very few others who are in craft, but now there's a new growing breed of craftspeople who are not Dalits, perhaps, and not Muslims, perhaps. But there are very many of them are women. So when these issues come up, how will we deal with that as well as in terms of the craft? So there are all contentious issues, but they are not frightening issues for me or for those of us who sat today. So we will begin this discussion and this dialogue to create a new discourse where we'll talk about everything under the sun that affects them and make sure that since they are the second largest group of self-employed people in India, we will see to it that they get their voice heard. That we have promised. But beyond that, the details we'll have to wait for.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful conversation. In a rather simplistic way of looking, mine, we've got a lot of craftspeople who are usually in the bottom half of our income distribution, selling products to largely people in the top 10% of our income distribution. So if we're going to preserve, and you all mentioned the grave decline by decade in the number of craftspersons, if you're going to succeed in arresting that decline in some way, ultimately it's an urban job. You mentioned 7,000 rupees by the gentleman who came back from his, it's 7 to 20,000 rupees. That's the most that most urban factory workers make. Now, how do you deliver that to a rural craftsperson, given the huge disparities between what a machine can produce and what hands can produce, which the world has been dealing with for the last 3 centuries? The one is, Uzramma, your wonderful experiment with trying to make semi-automated, decentralized cotton spinning. It uses electricity in some way. Some of the spinning, at least I remember our conversation about those machines, right? So I'm saying we need to blur the lines between machines and hand, for one, and try to see what we can do to increase the productivity of hand with machine. So we need one kind of thinking which is hybrid, where both have a role to play in the making of a product, so that more than 10% of our population can afford to buy it. The other is a more purist role, where we stick with the kind of products and patterns and what we have, but sell to much more of the rich world, and we've done a very bad job of doing that. So we're not really able to sell overseas in any large quantity. Some of it, yes, the khadi you mentioned, but we could do so much more. I think that is one solution, and that's not only government. There's a lot of private sector which could do it if they had a long-term thinking. Would be very curious to know if you thought other countries have got this right, the balance of how they treat their traditional crafts. Would love to hear that. Then other area of opportunities, actually government, I don't know if handicrafts are GST exempt. Should they be? And would they make a significant difference? Increase. So if one can fight for that exemption, I know in Karnataka there was a group attempting to do that. And lastly, in education, strangely enough, if you look at, well, the computer comes from, as you all know, and most people in the room would know, comes from the Jacquard punch card, which the Jacquard looms, that's a direct descent. The computer is a direct descendant of that. And if you look at our Bhakti saints, and Aruna mentioned that, how come there are far more farmers in India than craftspeople? But most of our saints tend to be craftspeople, the poets, the Bhakti poets. And there is something about craft which actually allows you to do that, to think differently. So now if schools in California are teaching weaving, why can't we teach weaving? Why can't we have thousands of weavers as part of school faculty, which would not just help them, it would change that perception which you all spoke about of how we don't appreciate craft. Sorry, some of these comments, but a couple of questions. Which countries got it right? Will the GST exemption make a big difference? Do you agree that we should try to blur between the machine versus hand distinction that we make?
Well, you've asked so many things and touched on so many topics that my head is in a bit of a whirl, but let me try. Yes, there's GST, which ranges from 4% to 18% on different categories, and that is, of course, killing, because not only is it an extra burden in terms of what the craftsperson has to charge, but it kicks in also when a craftsperson makes something of a material which is made by somebody else's hand, so they have to pay, that layers of GST, which often makes the product completely overpriced. So yes, removing GST would be a huge blessing to everybody, both the craftsperson and the consumer. Then you talked about technology. Well, I'm of a band of people who think that made handcrafted doesn't necessarily mean that every bit of the process has to be made by hand. And in fact, it's not, because craftspeople use tools, they use machinery, but it's usually very, very simple and outdated and often hazardous. So if we had young people from our IITs going and looking at various craft practices, a case in point is glass blowing in Firozabad, where on an open furnace people are blowing glass and they end up at the age of 30 or so with lung cancer or TB. So that's a whole area where some sort of intervention is required. Potters, it doesn't alter the skill of the potter's hand if it is there's an electric kiln instead of sort of a coal-fired kiln. So many little things like that. The looms themselves can have very simple. I mean, there's a weaver in South India who I think has modified his own loom so he can handle it by himself, because both his sons didn't want to enter handloom weaving. So he manages to keep up the family income by doing it himself. So I think again that there are many phases to the craft process, and all of them need looking at, including things like costing and pricing, packaging, etc. And I think it would make a difference to the price, to the quality, and also to the quality of the craftsperson's life. And it would certainly reduce the cost and make craft accessible to more than the 10% that you mentioned.
Good evening, and really honored to be able to be here today and hear Aruna ma'am and Laila ma'am and Uzramma ma'am. I'm actually 51 years old, and I grew up in a little town right next to Tilonia called Ajmer. And by the time I was 13 or 14, I think that's when we first visited Tilonia and the Hastakala Sansthan. I think that's what the board there says. And I heard the names of Bankar Roy and Aruna Roy. And I'm so honored to be able to hear you and to see you, and because I was always inspired by the work that you all did.
Better 51 years ago.
Oh, you do, ma'am. Oh, you do. Absolutely, absolutely. So when I saw what was done in Tilonia, by the time I was 18, 19 in college and coming back to the Tilonia shop, always, with my relatives or friends who came from overseas. And I understood what was done, I understood that this was a place which had less than 2 centimeters of rain, and somehow a person who was, if I'm not wrong, an IS officer then, could get the people together to find the craft inside them and express. So this particular patchwork has been part of my home and life always. I have a green color one. And of course, it's a quintessential picture of a family under the tree of life. And Laila ma'am's work with Dastakar. Why I'm so touched is I'm a Bangalore girl, and I've been in the IT industry. I'm a corporate executive. I did a 15-year career, and my life moved to Goa. And in the rural environment of Goa, I found that I was actually useless. I was unemployed. I was not generating any wealth. I didn't know how to apply my mind and my work. Of course, I work with alcoholics and in the recovery work in an anonymous way. So I definitely don't earn anything out of it. But I kept thinking, how is it that in the village I can work myself? And then, I started following Laila ma'am and Uzramma ma'am's work, and there was a time when a group of people got together on the Facebook with a sari group, and immediately, my mind was in overdrive, like, okay, the closest to Goa is Belgaum, and we can have the weavers come in, and you guys, you ladies were inspiring me. Of course, Aruna Roy's RTI. I mean, I couldn't survive in Goa without an RTI. I mean, we are one of the RTI activists, you know, we can protect ourselves only because of the RTI. But coming back to today's topic and what you have been sharing with us, and the question that what I saw in Goa was this interesting phenomena of foreigners coming as tourists and then moving into the various parts of our country, especially Jaipur, Bagru, into Andhra, into Assam, and picking up our fabrics and, of course, designing them in modern ways in the way the Western world loves to wear the stitched cloth, which is easy to wear. And I have a friend, you know, Ondi. She has this little boutique called Om Khadi, and she even went down backwards into the Jaipur villages, Bagru villages, to dye and print and create designs from the same block printing technology. I also saw for myself the kind of, come to the question, is that I saw the marked difference in price from what we would get the Bagru in Jaipur and what my friends and people I know would sell in California or New York. So when, you know, with the Android, with the technology of the Android phones, with e-markets, with this gap which we can cover from the customer to the producer, the weaver, why is this is something which is totally missing, that this huge markup which the weaver, as you said, that they are getting aware, now they are getting aware because of the technology, but this is something that could be done, and our weavers and our groups who are creating this beautiful fabric and the art could access the market and command those prices which other people are commanding. I mean, an old Kantha jacket for like ₹1,00,000 rupees, but yes. So this is my question: is that why is it that big organizations like Dastkar or cooperatives or thought leaders are not working on this to have technology capture this?
Well, I agree with you that there's a huge gap between what the primary producer makes and what it is sold internationally. But I think that somewhere we also while we get indignant about it, we forget that if that rural craftsperson wanted to sell in New York, there would be a huge cost for him. He would also have to put up huge margins. So I don't think the idea is that every craftsperson should become their own entrepreneur. We need entrepreneurs. But yes, the craftsperson should be aware of the price and value of his skill, and the entrepreneur should also be able to be a little compassionate. And the more knowledge they have about each other, the easier that becomes.
Do we have time to take on 2 more questions? Yeah, and please be very brief, huh? Because there's no time.
Very sure. I'm scared of that man there. Thank you for that lovely talk. I aspire to be as fun as you three are someday, really. So, ma'am, my question is to Aruna, ma'am, actually. What, in your view, is the role of artists in protecting their democracy, and do we see that role fading in India? Also, is cultural appropriation for political gains a concern today? Cultural appropriation for political gains a concern.
My dear, you've asked a question which will take me half an hour to answer. But in any case,
accept a personal interview.
Yeah, we can talk about it later, but I really do think that culture is politics and politics is culture. So weaving is politics for me. How you weave is politics for me. We're not far away from it. How you are categorized for doing something is politics for me. But I think we should continue this conversation outside.
Yes, sure.
Yeah, because there are great hurry and we have to finish with some songs at the end as well. Yeah.
I just was curious to know why Dilli Haat, in its original concept, was not replicated anywhere else in India when it's so successful. I know it's corrupted now, but why was it never replicated anywhere else in any other city in India?
Actually, that's not right. You know, after the success of Dilli Haat, many cities have built. There's one in Srinagar, there's one in Mysore, there's one in Udaipur, and many, many other cities which I'm unfamiliar with have built it. But what I think they didn't realize, the municipalities or the local governments, is there's more to creating a living, vibrant space for craft than building a row of huts or even brick stalls. And a lot of work goes into it. And one day when you have the time, I'll tell you how long it takes. It's taken us 42 years.
Let's give Uzramma and Laila a hand. Big hand. Yeah.
Thank you, Uzramma, Laila ji and Aruna ji, for such an engaging conversation. We had a lot to learn from you this evening, especially about the politics of khadi, the process of growing cotton and turning it into a fabric. Your positive attitude, कि सब कुछ उतना बुरा नहीं है, and we have to keep moving in that direction. And Aruna ji, the aspect of the lives of craftspeople and where they lie in the social hierarchy and their issues with their rights and entitlements.